Okay, so welcome everyone. This is the 2021 JHU Alumni Weekend Anthropology Showcase. It's very unfortunate that we cannot meet in person. Last year, we had a lovely time setting up a table and meeting those of you who had returned to Hopkins to reminisce about your days here, and those of you who were just curious and dropping by. But the alumni office and Hopkins in general has tried very hard to bring us together as a community using Zoom to the best of its abilities. And so in that spirit, we wanted to present to you our department and to give you a sense of its history and its current composition and some of the bright students who are anthropology majors in it. So I won't speak very much longer. I just will introduce myself. I am Navida Khan. I'm a faculty member in the anthropology department, and I'm also the director of undergraduate studies, which means that I get to hang out with the undergraduates, sort through some of their issues, but most often have them, tell me about the world outside. And I take a lot of pleasure in that. We are going to have a very brief program today. We only are going to go from 1 to 1:30, and so I don't want to take up too much time doing this introduction. Very quickly, we are going to start with a recorded message from the chair of the department. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to get to campus, but he found a picture of our building, Mergenthaler, and so his message comes from the virtual space of Mergenthaler on campus. And then we're going to follow that up with two short presentations by two of our majors talking about the independent research that they have been carrying out and how it is that they came to anthropology and what it is that they're taking from anthropology to their other majors or to their lives. So I won't continue. I'm just going to cut to the recorded message. And if you have any questions at the end of the two presentations, please, by all means, I'll be happy to take them. And you can actually continue to converse even after I leave, because I have to go teach at 1:30. That's the nature of life. Yeah. Okay, so let me just share the screen and share.
What do you think?
Share Anand's. I hear babies. How nice. Okay, I'm going to play the message.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this session with the Department of Anthropology. My name is Anand Pandian, and I am the chair at present of the Anthropology Department. I have taught here at Johns Hopkins for, well, over a dozen years now. It's been a wonderful experience that many of you have had as well as alums and as family and friends of our distinguished alumni, both undergraduate and graduate. The department, as you may know, was founded approximately 50 years ago in the 1970s as a kind of collaboration between anthropologists and historians. In its early days, it was closely identified with the program in Atlantic Studies here at Johns Hopkins University. Since then, the department has gone through many different incarnations, and at present, we have many distinguished faculty who work on a wide range of research areas, ranging from medical anthropology to the anthropology of architecture, urban design, to matters of language, religion, to questions of ecology and environment. And all of these topics take our faculty and our students as well to many different research sites around the world. We take quite seriously the importance of practical worldly engagement as a matter of both research method as well as a pedagogic style. We often in our classes here at Hopkins, encourage students to do work in field environments as part of their training, either in the city here when we are in session, or through field exercises elsewhere as part of longer term research projects. To give you just one small sense of that, I'm personally teaching 2 classes this semester, both of which involve students in forms of grounded empirical research. I'm co-teaching our undergraduate methods class at present with Professor Clara Hahn, and we have all the students in the class engaged in small-scale research studies about different dimensions of contemporary life under the conditions of the pandemic. I'm also co-teaching another class called a sustainable design studio with a colleague, Professor Nicole Labruto, who is an assistant research professor in the department. This class has our students involved in research projects with Black-led community organizations, 2 of them in South Baltimore. And like this, there are many colleagues of ours in the department who have these kinds of real world commitments, both to different places around the city and to many countries around the world. Our graduate students have undertaken quite distinguished research of this kind in many different places on many important and timely topics, as well as many of our undergraduate students as well, who pursue theses of their own design. And I believe at this point, you will hear more about some of these research projects from our students themselves. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Well, without too much of an introduction, just a short introduction to our next speaker, Nafisa, who is a junior undergraduate from Philadelphia, and she's majoring in neuroscience and anthropology. Her future goals are to work with kids and to work in medicine to provide equitable healthcare for her community. In her free time, she likes to paint, bake, and spend time with her family. She's going to be talking about the research that she is currently undertaking. Nafisa, you want to share your presentation?
Yes, let me share my screen. 1 second. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. Yes, so I'm Nafisa. I'm a junior currently, and I am working on this research project for my senior thesis in anthropology. So I can give a little bit of background about myself to give you kind of where this research project came from and where the inspirations came from. So I grew up like a lot of Muslim youth in America. I went to public school, and then I went to Sunday school at my local mosque. Eventually, when I got to high school, I joined a part-time program after school at a madrasa. So what a madrasa is, it's like a secondary school for Muslims who want to go more into depth into religious studies. So there's a lot of different programs that they can join. They could join a program where they memorize the Quran in Arabic. There's programs where they can learn more in depth about the laws of Islam and interpretations of other texts throughout history. So these are full-time programs that take about 5 to 6 years. And that's the main focus of their education. And the culmination of the program results in a degree that's like the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. And they also complete cyber school for a high school diploma. But then there's also programs that are part-time after school. There's also programs for adults on the weekends, things like that. So the madrasa kind of becomes like a community center. So I joined this part-time program, and then eventually, obviously, I came to college. And so I found it really interesting how my path diverged from those of my friends who chose to pursue madrasa careers. So the event that sparked my research question specifically was the 2016 election. So the madrasa that I attended actually came out and endorsed voting for Donald Trump, which was really shocking to me because it was a very Democrat area in general. And Trump was obviously not the most fondest of Muslims during his campaign. But it turned out that the madrasa's reasoning wasn't because of enthusiastic support for Donald Trump, but because they were trying to adhere to a saying by the prophet that women shouldn't be elected leaders of a country. So I was really intrigued how this community that was, based in an Islamic space was choosing to relate to a wider non-Muslim community. So that's where my two research questions kind of came from. One is, what are the cultural and gender discourses that affect the daily lives of madrasa students in the different spheres that they interact in? And then the second question is, how do these students relate to the broader American public? And so my hope is in that answering these questions, I can illuminate our understanding of identity formation in minority communities. So my original plan was to conduct ethnographic fieldwork in person in two different madrasas, one in Pennsylvania and one in Maryland. But because of the pandemic, I had to move to a remote modality. My research subjects were young women aged 18 to 30 years old, both students and teachers. The madrasas were also online for the most part, so I was able to do classroom observation over Google Meet and over the phone. I held individual interviews over Zoom or over the phone, and I also had focus groups over Zoom. And I hope that once things start to open back up again, I'm able to go visit my interlocutors in person and attend some events and classes. One of the groups that I'm interviewing is graduating, so I would love to be able to attend that event and observe, their interactions, because I've learned a lot from the students through interviews about their relationships with each other and how they view their relationships with their teachers. But I haven't been able to observe unstructured conversations in a casual environment, which I think would be really interesting for my research to understand the madrasa dynamic. So I've done, some of the field work, but I haven't finished. So here are some preliminary findings from what I have, researched so far. So one revelation from their interviews was the difference in how they view their experience in public school and how they view their experience in madrasa. So most of them attended public school before they chose to go to madrasa full-time. And they all had different personalities in public school, obviously from a diverse group of students. But the main theme that I noticed was that it was a filtered version of themselves. In school, they could have been quiet or outgoing or reserved. Some of them even said that they felt they were really mean in public school. I think one person said that they were really competitive in public school. And so, sometimes they would like cheat on tests and projects and things like that. But no matter what their personality was in public school, it was always a performance. And so in madrasa, they were able to be more genuine and form more familial relationships with their teachers and friends without having to put on a mask. Another important notion was how they related themselves to the Muslim community outside the madrasa. So an interesting terminology I noticed was that they called the people who were outside the madrasa as outside people. And so the way that they related themselves to the outside people was that they felt that the community really put them on a pedestal. And they were being seen as role models because they were pursuing this, spiritual and religious goal and program. So they felt that they had to adopt a more pious persona and act as paragons of virtue, essentially. And the last topic I want to touch on is the way that they frame their madrasa experience in terms of American values like freedom and independence. So a common stereotype is that Muslim women are oppressed and, Islam is very restrictive. Most of the women that I interviewed observe full burqa. And so they cover everything but their eyes. And so that, that's a very stereotypical image of an oppressed Muslim woman. But the students and teachers, whenever I asked them about American values and how they felt about them, they always expressed that they really appreciated that they're able to attend madrasa because of the American dream. So to them, they interpreted freedom as being able to pursue whatever they wanted, even if it's not the traditional American dream of, going to college and pursuing a monetary career, but choosing to attend madrasa and choosing to dress themselves in the way that they wanted. That was how they chose to exercise their independence. So I'll just end with my goals for the project and my personal goals for anthropology. I hope to write this project up for my senior thesis. Besides anthropology, I'm hoping to go into medical school, and I've been looking into dual degree programs that have a medical degree and also a master's or PhD in anthropology. And I always get asked, like, how does anthropology relate to medicine? Like, that seems so out there, like it's not related at all. But to me, in my opinion, I think anthropology is probably one of the most important fields for a physician to study. To understand the societal and cultural makeup of a community is essential to medicine, and being able to provide equitable healthcare and, understanding your patients beyond just being bodies, but as people, that have fears and anxieties and abilities and hopes and dreams, things like that. So I hope to take from my project lessons on how a community defines and navigates belonging in a country as diverse as America, and apply these lessons and these methods to my future in medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nafisa. That was great. I'll remove pin. Next, we have Amanda Ewan, and just a little introduction to her. She's a third-year undergraduate at Hopkins. She's majoring in international studies, anthropology, and minoring in East Asian studies. Amanda is very passionate about civil and human rights, public policy, and law. She's worked as a policy intern with the National Domestic Workers Alliance, among other places. Currently, she's a research assistant with P3 Lab, which focuses on understanding how to make the participation of ordinary people in democracy in the United States more robust. And she's also started to work on her senior thesis, which is looking at refugee assimilation in the US. And for this, she's received one of the very prestigious Provost's Undergraduate Research Award to fund the project. So thank you, Amanda, for presenting on your work that you did last summer for your last project. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. So I'm just going to share my screen really quick. All right. So like Professor said, I'm going to be presenting about the research I did last summer, which was building off of some of the research I did during my methods class in the spring. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I'm a third-year undergraduate. This was all kind of summarized in the bio, but I'm also interested in law school after college. So, and before that, I would like to take a gap year and do either like the Peace Corps or Fulbright program, hopefully somewhere abroad, because I was supposed to study abroad this year, but unfortunately, due to present circumstances, that did not happen. And then in terms of why anthropology, I was really captivated by Professor Pandian's invitation to anthropology class that he taught for freshmen. And in that class, we talked a lot about storytelling and ethnography. And I really saw a relationship between the two, and storytelling, more specifically storytelling through an audio medium, through podcasts, has really been an interest of mine, and oral storytelling. And then I really saw ethnography, or deep hanging out, as professors like to characterize it sometimes, as a really interesting facet of the discipline, and really wanted to continue that study. I also think that anthropology is a nice balance to my international studies degree, because in international studies, we often get caught up on like policy concerns or like big world macro level issues. And we don't oftentimes think about the people living on the ground when we're deciding on these different issues. So it's really been a nice balance in terms of just my coursework and my experience at Hopkins. So going into my research project that I'm kind of presenting today, it was focused on researching COVID-19 in healthcare workers. And like I said, it originally as a project for my methods class where I interviewed around 12 healthcare workers. Over the summer, I was able to expand that to around 20 to like 25 different healthcare workers from Baltimore, Los Angeles, and Detroit, cities that were hit particularly hard by COVID, but also in different ways. These professionals were interviewed 2 to 3 times between April and June. And as we all know, the pandemic changed a lot during those times. There were multiple waves of COVID. There were different lockdown restrictions that were eased and then put back into place. So it was really interesting to kind of track the experience of these healthcare workers over time. And I defined healthcare workers fairly broadly. Primarily, most of those I interviewed were doctors, but they also included nurses, EMTs, and technicians who had direct patient contact. And so these were some of my guiding research questions, which is how have practices of care changed with COVID-19? How has the role of the healthcare worker changed during COVID-19? And how has the healthcare worker think about risk? And today I'm just gonna be focusing mostly on these first 2 questions. And on my right, I kind of have the big finding that relates to these 2 questions that I found, which is that COVID-19 has not only disrupted practices of care, but also networks of care. So this was when I went into my research, the network of care that I was thinking about. I was like, oh, well, it's just the patient and the doctor, and that's the main relationship that exists within these hospital networks. And that's the same relationship that will continue during COVID-19. What I actually found is that during traditional times, this is more so what the networks of care look like. It's not just the doctor and the patient, which I have like listed all the way over here, but it's also, there's this aspect of, is someone a known COVID patient, a potential COVID patient, a negative COVID patient? There's also the EMT transporting them to the hospital. And then there's this aspect of family members, which is something that I found really fascinating and important part of the research. And I'll get into a little bit why later, but there's the family member of the patients, as well as the family members of the healthcare workers. So the healthcare worker, many of the healthcare workers expressed concerns about infecting their own family members when doing direct contact with COVID patients. But then there was also this aspect of, with no visitors allowed in the hospital, it made it really difficult for them to not have a support, for the patient to not have a support network like a traditional family structure that they would normally be able to rely on. So this is kind of one of the networks of care that I discovered in my research. And I think that this doctor from Michigan really captured it beautifully, because she talks about the COVID symptoms and how when you get COVID, you often get short of breath. It makes you feel very anxious because it feels like you're suffocating. So of all these things, any healthcare provider, the nurses taking care of the patient, having to be the emotional support for the patients and family constantly, because there's no connection between the two, you're in the middle of both. And so she described herself as having to constantly be on the phone with family members, and be kind of that in-between guidance when normally the family member would be in the room, part of the healthcare practice with them. So that's, again, a disruption of this traditional network of care. And actually, like, I found this, the reason why I kind of like had to stop my research at the end of the summer was because I actually had a family member who didn't have COVID, but was unfortunately, like, my grandfather was like in the hospital, and we weren't allowed to like go visit him. We weren't allowed to kind of like discuss with the nurses. And so we were constantly on the phone with the doctors, and it was really difficult because he's like hard of hearing, didn't really speak English. And in traditional times when he had been hospitalized for past accidents, we were able to be there and be the family member communicating to the doctors and nurses what was going on. And then in this scenario during COVID, it hit very personally. And I actually saw what the doctors were specifically talking about in my interviews with them play out in my own life, this disconnect that's occurring between healthcare workers, patient, and family members. So then this is kind of like a looking forward to with anthropology. So I'm about to start like my senior thesis on the American refugee assimilation process from the perspective of NGO nonprofit organizations. And I'm currently working in a political science lab at Agora JHU. It's been really nice to work at that lab because I've been doing a lot of field research for them and more qualitative research, which is something that they haven't necessarily like built out in terms of their capacity. And so it was nice to be able to bring kind of those skill sets I was able to develop during my methods class and just throughout my anthropological journey at Hopkins into that institute. And then, like I said, anthropology has been able to act as a contrast to my more historically or policy-focused international studies classes. It's really made me more interested in direct services work when I hopefully do go to law school and become a lawyer. And I kind of talk about this in my last bullet point, which is the importance of grounding my work in the experience of the people beyond just what they tell you, but then the contextual presence. So I'm hopeful that after that, for my senior thesis, there might be a possibility where I'll be able to actually go to these NGOs, ask direct interviews face-to-face to kind of develop that in-person connection once COVID is over. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So we have a few minutes before the end of the program. So I'm wondering, oh yeah, I see a hand up from a faculty member, Nilfa Hairi, who's in our department and my colleague. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I really enjoyed hearing Nafisa and Amanda's work. It's really wonderful to see how, because you both basically started this fieldwork in the methods class. Also, Nafisa did. And it was really wonderful to hear both of you having thought so much further about what you have found, the importance of experience, the importance of talking to people about how they see themselves, for example, Nafisa, and also in your case, Amanda, about how you hear about these things and then it happens to you and how your knowledge sort of transforms and changes. I just wanted to say I really enjoyed it, and I'm really happy that I hear that you started this in the methods class. So that's it, basically.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I have to go teach. I'm so sorry.
No, but thank you so much for attending. And I have to say, one thing that I found really interesting in what both of you mentioned is that it's not just a question of asking people what their perceptions are, thought are, etc., but also to embed yourself, to be there, to realize that you are also getting entangled in relations with people, right? That informs or enriches what you're hearing from them, right? What Amanda very nicely said, contextual knowledge, right? Which I thought was very good. And this is how, in some ways, you might think of the difference between anthropology and, say, journalism or opinion research, right? And I thought that came out very nicely through your research projects. Are there, yeah, I see Alessandro Angelini, who's also a colleague of mine in the anthropology department.
We're not plants in the audience, are we? I have a genuine question or observation.
I'm going to post this on our website. So
okay. Well, then the spotlight's on. I just wanted to note that how both of your projects so wonderfully take this extraordinary moment and do something that our instinct is to treat this moment of the pandemic as like an interim and we'll wait for a return to normality, et cetera. And of course, our bread and butter fieldwork methods have taken a critical hit. But what I hear is that you're developing these projects in this moment and to treat this moment as on its own terms, right? This is not something in between a before and after, but a very critical moment to investigate in its own right. So I commend you. It's not something any of us could have anticipated, but you've taken the moment by the horns, and I'm excited to see what emerges in a year's time.
very good point.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I see that we've come to the end of our time. And I just want to thank Anand, our chair, for his opening remarks, and Nafisa and Amanda for wonderful presentations, and actually very, very nice comments by my colleagues as well, just, as a way to showcase to you anthropology. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.